Alright guys, my name is Goblin, and today I was making a very quick discussion video answering a very simple question: can you PvP in a combat sword spec, so your typical kind of usual raiding optimal DPS spec? The simple answer to that question is I think it's perfectly viable, I think it's perfectly doable. You just kind of have to understand that you have to adapt and change your playstyle and understand your advantages and disadvantages in PvP. Better way to put that would be your strengths and weaknesses in a PvP environment, because there are a number of really great, quite astounding and surprisingly powerful strengths to, messing about with combat in a PvP environment that I think are actually quite underappreciated. So that's something that I'm going to highlight in this video. So when Battlegrounds were first released, I basically had a bit of a mess around in Warsong Gulch with a few of my guild members. And what I realised is that my damage was absolutely ridiculous. I was expecting to, not perform particularly well at all, because I don't have all of the control, the utility, all the advanced kind of like special subtlety talents and abilities that spec tree has. I was thinking without that I'm just going to be pretty useless and I'm going to be pinned down all the time. But to be honest, because I was playing with healers and I had like pocket healers with me who were kind of protecting me, keeping me healed up, dispelling my snare, dispelling my CC, odd hand of freedom now and again, what I was able to do is actually pull off a ridiculous amount of DPS. And basically what I think combat swords is a viable spec to play. You just kind of have to play as if you're playing a warrior almost, okay? Because warriors don't have all of the control and utility that a rogue has, obviously, but they do ridiculous damage. And rogue combat swords also do ridiculous damage. So when you play the class a little bit like how a warrior would play, you actually do perform quite effectively in a PvP environment. I think there's a number of reasons why your damage is absolutely so ridiculous. I think the first reason is obviously having two swords equipped actually will more or less do more DPS than having a dagger equipped, or a dagger and a sword. So that's the first thing, you're doing more DPS. You're going to have sword specialization, which procs quite often and will do ridiculous DPS. And if you combine that with Hand of Justice, again, even more ridiculous DPS. You have access to cooldowns like Blade Flurry and Adrenaline Rush, which obviously give you ridiculous amount of burst DPS. But obviously, it kind of relies on the fact that you have to be on your target all the time, and obviously subtlety kind of has better utility to make it easier for you to stay on your target, or to take down your target in a short space of time in like crowd control windows. And obviously you have less crowd control windows when you're playing combat swords, but the amount of damage is massively increased. So when you do play with a pocket healer, you are able to just basically become this absolute DPS machine with your Blade Flurry and everything else. Obviously there are massive downsides to playing combat sword spec, and you are really restricted to your sprint ability being, available. Because obviously sprint, what it does when you spec into swords, you get the sprint effect that one has a reduced cooldown, and you also are able to, basically break crowd control effects, providing that you spec into endurance and the improved sprint talents. So the kind of issue with that is that you are very restricted to, having to use sprint in order to get onto the target. But when, oh my god, when you actually do use sprint to get out of some kind of ice nova and you're able to get on the target, you just destroy targets, right? Obviously there are some weaknesses to this spec, and I think, the main way you can really exploit the spec and make it useful in the PvP is to be on the target. So your weakness really is not being able to get on the target, because when you can get onto the target, you're basically a noodle, or wet noodle, whatever you want to call it. So what I would recommend if you're going to play combat swords in PvP is acquiring every single item, every single gimmick and every single trick in order to increase your movement speed, in order to keep you on the target. So we're talking swiftness potions, we're talking rocket boots, we're talking the Skull of a Pending Doom, we're talking the goblin charge helmet, literally everything that is available to you in order to keep you on your current target. I would basically try and get everything that you can and implement it into the spec to make it even more viable. You can also have access, another thing that I haven't mentioned, is you can mess around with the riposte ability as well. You will have to sacrifice points somewhere else, possibly, maybe in hit rating if you have enough hit rating, but probably not. It's difficult to see where you would waste points, to be honest. I'll have to think about that in the future when I make a more advanced guide for this spec. But obviously having riposte is ridiculously useful when you're up against warriors. So yeah, that's another thing to bear in mind, because that pretty Riposte like procs very often, and it's a short cooldown, 6-second cooldown. It does a lot of damage, barely costs any energy, and it's just a very easy disarm which will last for 6 seconds. And that is going to be ridiculously useful against other rogues because, one, barely any other rogues are going to go for a riposte spec or a combat sword spec in PvP, so you're going to be able to defeat rogues pretty quick, pretty easily, and you're going to be able to defeat warriors pretty easily because when you take that meaty two-handed weapon off them, then you're it's pretty much happy days for you, to be honest, unless they have that weird glove item that makes them immune to disarm. So, just to conclude, I don't think combat swords is an absolutely terrible, unviable spec. I think you can definitely make it viable with just a little bit of a playstyle alteration. It's definitely going to be a great pre-made PvP spec, because when you're pre-mading, Battlegrounds, playing in your, typical subtlety spec is like all, the other variations of specs that you can go for. They're great for 1v1 situations and being that sole survivor in PvP, and if that's what you want to do, that's fair enough, but at the end of the day, that is not incredibly useful in a a team play environment. It might be useful for you to farm honor and get cool PvP videos, but at the end of the day, if you want to be useful to your team, then you want to be in those team fights and stuff like that. So it's just something to bear in mind, and I think the combat sword spec does a ridiculous amount of damage, and when you've got pocket healers, you can stay on the target and apply a ridiculous amount of pressure, and I think it's just generally going to be very useful for a pre-made group spec when you've got warriors and mages and healers all set up in a raid group ready to go and do some Warsong Gold or something. So yeah, I just definitely would give combat swords a go, because at the end of the day you are going to save a lot of money. You're going to save 50 gold a week respecing, to honest, you'll probably have to respec maybe even more than that, but most people are probably going to save about 50 gold a week, not having to respec all the time, and obviously that is a really great convenience, especially if you're like me, you don't have the time to play the game a lot, obviously because of my injury. I can't play the game a lot, so I can't farm gold over and over, so it's a great thing for me. That's why I'm going to stick with it, because I feel like it's it's a fun spec to stick with, and I don't have to farm loads of gold to keep respecing, so that is another perk. But anyway, I think I've gibbered on long enough. I think I'm going to end the video there. My name is Metagoblin. Until my next video, ciao.